If you were to go back and look at your first Facebook post ever made, you would go, what in the world was I talking about? The Bible is that times a million. It's not gonna make sense. But that doesn't mean it's not wise. Doesn't mean it can't teach us something. I wanna give you some tips this morning on how to read the Bible. When I say scripture, that's exactly what I mean, is how to read the Bible. So here's my tips for reading the Bible. First one, read it. I say that tongue in cheek, but here's what I would say is don't read books about the Bible, read the Bible. Don't listen to podcasts about the Bible, read the Bible. Don't listen to the recap of the Bible without reading the Bible. Are you with me? Read it, pick it up. And here's the deal, this is what we have a tendency to do. And I've been, I have done this my whole entire life, but you pick it up and you read 6 or 8 verses and you move on to the next part of your day. Get in the habit of reading large chunks of scripture. I mean, you can read the Gospel of Mark in about 50 minutes. Read the whole thing. Get a feeling for the ups and the downs and the movements of the text in scripture. Let it work on you. Don't read a section of Paul's letter to Timothy. Read the whole letter. Get a feel for what he's talking about. Read scripture. Read it. I think the second thing is to explore it. And here's what I mean. Here's what I mean by that. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to set some of you guys free this morning. The Bible is weird. There's just some strange stuff in there. It's strange. It is. And think about it for a second. I mean, the Bible, especially the beginning, is 25, 26, 3,000 years old. I mean, think about that for a second. I mean, some of you guys, if you were to go back and look at your first Facebook post ever made, you would go, what in the world was I talking about, right? I mean, the Bible is that times a million. I mean, it's thousands of years old. It's ancient. It's not gonna make sense, especially with things going on today necessarily. But that doesn't mean it's not wise. Doesn't mean it can't teach us something. Explore it. If there's something in there that you run up against that is counter to how you believe, or maybe you don't understand, or maybe you wonder, why would Jesus say that? How could Paul say something like that? Why would God have commanded this? Explore that. I think sometimes we run up against something that we don't understand and then we're done. I don't get this. Explore it. And here's the starting place for you. And this changed my whole perception of scripture when I went to this place. And you've heard us talk about this before in a lot of different ways, especially if you've been around Beachside for a long time. That the resurrection of Jesus, the historical event, Jesus died on a Roman cross and he came back to life. That's the beginning of our search, right? That's where we start from. And scripture tells us that for God so loved the world that he sent his only son. That God came and he died on a Roman cross because he loved you. And so when you read scripture and something doesn't make sense and you go, that doesn't seem like a loving God. Well, Jesus died on a cross for me. Maybe I need to explore this passage and figure out what's actually going on here. When you come across something and you don't like it or it doesn't make sense or you don't think it lines up with something else, your faith is not built on that. Your faith is built on the historical resurrection of Jesus. So you have the freedom to explore scripture, to figure out what it means, to not give up, but to lean in when something doesn't make sense. Because we have the responsibility to explore scripture, to read it, and to explore it, to figure it out. If you subscribe to any of our devotionals this year, when this thing comes out tomorrow, I'll put some commentaries on there of things that I've read that have helped me explore scripture, to help me make sense of some of the things in there that don't seem to make sense. I'll link those in there and they're pretty accessible and you can have access to those things, but explore scripture. And finally, here's the last one: to read it, explore it, and memorize it. Memorize scripture. Because here's what happens in our lives, and you guys know this, that at some point in your life, life is gonna get difficult. Things are gonna be hard. A situation is gonna come up, and you're going to react to that situation. You're gonna react. And a lot of times our reaction are things that we can't necessarily control. They just come out. And you guys know this, you've reacted in ways that are poorly different times in your life. Some of them are a big deal, some of them are a small deal, but our reactions matter. And when we internalize scripture, when we memorize it, when it becomes part of who we are, we have a tendency, listen, we have a tendency to react with scripture. We have a tendency to act because it works on our heart. Over the last couple of weeks, the scripture that has been stuck in my brain the most is the scripture in Psalms. The psalmist says, "Today is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it." It doesn't matter what my day is, how my day is going, right? It doesn't matter if I would grade it on a 0 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10. Today is the day that the Lord has made, and I will choose to rejoice in it. That's how I've begun to react. Some of you, as you begin to read scripture and it begins to change you, you'll be driving down Eglin and you'll see Chick-fil-A. You're like, I'm trying to cut that out. And you go, that's my Goliath, you know? That's the giant. But you begin to see the world through the lens of scripture. Scripture will change how we think. Read it. Explore it. Don't give up on it. Lean in if it doesn't make sense. Lean in if it's hard. Ask somebody wiser than you. This is why small groups are so important. Show up to your group. I read the scripture. It doesn't make sense. I don't like this. Help me understand. And then memorize it. Internalize it. Internalize it. Scripture will change how we think. There was a study that came out a couple of years ago from the Center of Bible Engagement. And here's what they found. People who read the Bible 4 to 5 times a week report more mental and emotional well-being, 57% lower odds of getting drunk, 68% lower odds of viewing pornography, 74% lower odds of gambling, 57% lower odds of extramarital sex. And they conclude by saying this, that those who read the Bible frequently were more likely to share their faith, disciple others, and give financially to their church. Because scripture changes you. And here's what's interesting about that, is that 4 to 5 times a week was the tipping point. That anybody who read their Bible 3 times a week didn't quite seem to get all the same benefits as the rest of us. That 4 to 5 times a week, that making it a daily habit changes you from the inside out. Scripture changes how you think. Scripture changes you. If we want to pay attention to the ideas that are governing our life that might not be real, that might not be true, we have to start with scripture. Because scripture changes how we think. It changes who we are. Lean in and make a habit. Explore it, memorize it. You'll begin to see. You'll begin to see how it changes the way you think about the world around you. Because listen, scripture is the story of Jesus, the truest, realest human that's ever existed. And when Jesus dies on a cross and comes back to life, I want to get to know that dude. Scripture is the story of Jesus. And when we lean in, it changes how we think. It renovates our mind.